The Vanishing Room. The Driftwood Motel sat at the edge of nowhere, its neon sign a faint beacon for weary travelers. It had seen better days, peeling paint, creaking pipes, and a constant smell of mildew that no amount of scrubbing could eliminate. Laura wished she could sell it, leave the small Michigan town and the memories of her father behind. But selling wasn't an option. After his death a year ago, the motel became her responsibility, along with the mounting debts and the occasional unsettling nights. The guest in room 6. It was a stormy night when the man arrived. Thunder rolled across the flat plains, shaking the motel's fragile structure. Laura was closing up the office, counting the day's meager earnings, when she heard the chime of the front bell. "Still open?" the man asked. He was in his late 40s, with a gaunt face and shadows under his eyes. His clothes were rumpled, as if he'd been driving for hours. Laura hesitated before nodding. "Barely. Just one room left. Room 6. The man seemed relieved. He slid a credit card across the counter, and Laura noticed his hands trembled slightly. She didn't ask questions. It wasn't her place. Handing him the key, she gave her usual scripted smile. "Checkout's at 11. Quiet place, right?" the man asked, glancing over his shoulder at the empty parking lot. "I need quiet." "Quiet as a graveyard," Laura said, though the words felt strange in her mouth. The man nodded, took the key, and walked into the rain. Through the window, Laura watched as he unlocked the door to room 6, his figure disappearing into the faint yellow light. Laura woke early the next morning as she always did. She brewed coffee, updated the register, and prepared for another slow day. Her routine was interrupted when she stepped outside to check the rooms. Her heart stopped. Room 6 was gone. She stood in the parking lot, blinking at the row of doors. Rooms 1 through 5 were there. So were 7 through 10. But where room 6 had been, there was nothing. Just a smooth, unbroken wall of concrete. "What the hell?" she muttered, stepping closer. She ran her hands along the wall. It was cold, seamless, as though no door had ever existed. She checked the key in her pocket. The brass tag still read room 6. Back in the office, Laura grabbed the guest register. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages. The man's name, his signature, his payment, it was all gone. There was no record of anyone checking into room 6. Not last night, not ever. She called the police. "You're sure you're not miscounting?" the officer asked, barely stifling a laugh. "I'm not crazy," Laura snapped. "I know my own motel." The officer promised to send someone over, but no one came. By evening, Laura was pacing the office, clutching the keys to the other rooms. She avoided looking at the wall where room 6 had been, as if staring too long might make something worse happen. A stranger arrives. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Laura heard a knock on the office door. She jumped, spilling cold coffee onto her desk. Standing outside was a man in a trench coat, his expression calm but curious. "Laura?" he asked. "I'm Elliot Crane. I heard about your situation." Laura frowned. "Who told you?" "I work with a private organization that investigates unusual occurrences," Elliot said, pulling a small badge from his coat. It didn't look like anything official, but his tone was confident. Rooms don't just disappear, at least not normally. Against her better judgment, Laura let him in. She watched as he set a small, handheld device on the counter. It emitted a faint hum and flashed with strange blue lights. "Residual energy," Elliot murmured, his eyes narrowing. "Something happened here. Something unnatural." Laura told him everything. The man who stayed in room 6, the missing door, the vanishing records. Elliot listened carefully, nodding as though he'd heard it all before. "This isn't the first time I've seen something like this," he said. "Places where reality bends. They don't follow the rules we understand." Laura swallowed hard. "What does that mean?" "It means your motel is sitting on unstable ground," Elliot said. "Not physically, dimensional ground. Room 6 didn't disappear. It was pulled somewhere else." The experiment. Elliot convinced Laura to help him run an experiment. They returned to the corridor where room 6 had been. He placed his strange device against the wall, tweaking the dials until the hum grew louder. The air felt heavier, charged with static. "Whatever happened here left a mark," Elliot explained. "We're going to coax it out." The wall began to shimmer faintly. Laura gasped as an outline of the missing door appeared, flickering like a bad signal. Moments later, room 6 was back, its door slightly ajar. A low, ominous hum emanated from within. "Don't go in," Elliot warned, stepping back. "This is a mistake." But Laura couldn't stop herself. She stepped forward, the keys rattling in her hand. "I have to know." Inside the room. The air inside room 6 was cold, heavy. The walls seemed to stretch and contract, their surfaces rippling like water. The furniture was wrong, twisted, half-formed shapes that barely resembled chairs and tables. In the center of the room sat the missing guest. He was hunched over, his head in his hands, rocking back and forth. "Sir?" Laura whispered, stepping closer. The man looked up. His face was gaunt, his skin translucent, flickering like static. His eyes locked onto hers, and he began muttering, his voice hollow. "I shouldn't have stayed. I shouldn't have stayed." The shadows along the walls began to move. They stretched and twisted, forming long, claw-like shapes. Whispering voices filled the room, speaking in a language Laura couldn't understand. The air grew colder, and her breath came out in visible puffs. "Laura, get out!" Elliot's voice boomed from the doorway. The shadows lunged. Laura stumbled backward, her foot catching on the uneven floor. She reached the door just as the shadows swarmed toward her. Elliot grabbed her arm, pulling her out as the room began to collapse. The door slammed shut, and the motel rumbled violently. When the shaking stopped, room 6 was gone again. The aftermath. In the office, Laura sat trembling as Elliot explained. "That room wasn't just a room," he said. "It was a doorway to somewhere else." "To where?" Laura asked, her voice shaking. Elliot shook his head. "Not somewhere we're meant to go." He urged her to leave the motel, to sell it and never return. But Laura stayed. She couldn't bring herself to abandon it, not without answers. Months passed, and the space where room 6 had been remained empty. But every so often, Laura would hear a faint hum, feel a cold breeze, and see a flicker of light under the door that wasn't there. And she would wait, knowing that one day room 6 would return, and she would be ready to step inside again. The end.